Week. I wanted to start our interview by just getting your views on the South Africa that we live in today.
Well, it's a vastly changed place, of course, from what it was in 1994. I was very privileged to be part of that process, and I must say there's almost a balance sheet now between the things that we've got right and the things that have gone wrong. And inevitably, after 2 decades, there's quite a lot on both sides of the balance sheet. But, the fact that we're having our 5th free election in broadly democratic circumstances and it's very competitive is, I think, a very good thing. There are very few countries on this continent where you have such a contested poll where in such peaceful circumstances. And I think that is really to the credit not just of our leadership, but really to the people and to the durability of our constitution.
Now, Mr. Leon, the run-up to the election is always quite a roller coaster, as you would know. Just let us into, what would parties be doing in the last days as they run up to the polls next week?
Well, I think there are 3 things, and certainly, this is the first election I'm a non-combatant in. It's quite a pleasant feeling, actually, I must tell you, but since '94. But there really are 3 things. The first is you try and maximize your presence in the run-up to the election, so that you want to be visible, you want to be out there, and of course that hugely favours the bigger parties, the ANC and the DA. It's much more difficult, and the EFF, I would say, it's much more difficult for the smaller parties to get the airtime because they have fewer resources. The second thing you're trying to do, whatever else appears to be on the scene, is to actually maximise your own base. In other words, elections really are about turning out your supporters. It's nice if you can get people to cross the floor, as it were, from other parties to vote for you. But if, for example, 100% of your potential supporters go and vote, you're going to do disproportionately better than the other side. So you actually are spending your time in your own base, even though you might appear to be reaching out to the other side. And the third thing, and perhaps this is the most difficult part of it, is you're worrying about what is out there that might come and trip you up. In other words, you're trying to maximize your positives and minimize your negatives. And I know from my own experience, there's always that lurking, smoking gun. Some event is going to trip you up in the last few days. And so the leadership tends to be rather anxious in these times because of that possibility.
Mr. Leon, we've got a lot of people talking to us online, and they've sent in some questions, and I just want to ask you 1 or 2 of the questions that's coming online on our Twitter page. Sure. People want to know what do you think of Helen Zille's tenure and style of leadership within the DA, and then also a question is she becoming more and more of a polarizing figure within the Democratic Alliance? What are your views on that?
Well, I led the Democratic Alliance and the predecessor Democratic Party for 13 years. She's led it since I stood down as leader in 2007, so she's been at the helm for 6 or 7 years. Over time, any leader, and I include myself in this, does become polarizing because you start with a lot of goodwill and capital or money in the bank, and then it gets depleted just in the nature of events. And I guess that's exactly what's happened to Helen over time, because being in the leadership hot seat means you've got to make decisions, and over time you can't please everyone. In fact, an effective leader has often got to stand up against some interests, and then that tends to count against you. So I guess over time she would attract negatives, as any leader would, and she's actually been in that leadership position longer than Jacob Zuma's been in his. And I think there have been some signals that after the election there'll be some leadership rearrangement. In fact, the leadership of South Africa's political parties is actually quite old, given except for Malema, of course, given the relative youth of our population. And I suspect across the political spectrum, the leadership of the various parties will refresh itself after the election.
Can I take you back a couple of months? I want to ask you your views on the PR disaster for the Democratic Alliance and Agang SA with the merger that went on and then all the negative publicity that followed from that. How do you think that will play out in the elections next week?
Well, Eben, I think there are two aspects. One is, you're quite right, it was a complete disaster. I mean, it lasted less than a week. There was no due diligence done by the DA on the essential terms and conditions of that proposal. And from Mampela Rampili's point of view, I don't know what she was thinking, quite frankly. In terms of the result, from the DA point of view, just looking at the polls without anything else at my disposal, I think it's got no effect on the DA result, in the sense that whatever the DA voted, and I think most of them were pretty unimpressed with how that played itself out, they appear to have discounted that and will support the DA. From the Ahang point of view, I think it really is a major setback, because they will get very, very few seats. I'll be very surprised if there are more than 4 Ahang MPs in Parliament. That means about 1% of the vote. And they will not be a factor in our politics going forward. So I think it's cost Ahang much more than it's cost the DA. But I suppose from the opposition point of view, I think there's always a desire among opposition voters to have a form of opposition unity rather than fragmentation. So there might be some disappointment. But I don't think it's going to have an impact on the voting intentions of DA supporters.
Do you think it's had an effect on sort of squabbling and leadership issues within the party, especially amongst the black leaders of the Democratic Alliance?
Well, I don't know about that. I've had the opportunity at their request to engage quite closely with the two of the leaders of the Democratic Alliance who are emerging and who happen to be black. The one is Lindiwe Mazibuko, who's the parliamentary leader, and the other is their Gauteng candidate for Premier, Musi Maimane. And, I think they're bright, personable, committed people. Whether that's going to play itself out in some kind of contest, well, I only know what I read about. And I guess any political party which is relevant remains contested terrain at the top of its leadership tree. But, that's something that's the party needs to put second. What they need to put first is if they do well in the election, if they don't do well, what are they going to do over the next 5 years? Yeah. Because I think everyone concedes, short of some earthquake that we're unaware of, that the African National Congress is going to be re-elected at a national level by a pretty hefty margin, might be somewhat less than they got last time. And the question for the opposition, and the DA is incontestably the principal opposition party, is what are we going to do over the next 5 years, not just to put ourselves in a stronger position electorally, but to make our message not just appealing, but coherent and contrasting to the narrative that's coming from the governing party. Because I think if there isn't clear blue water between the ruling party and its principal opposition, then one's got to say it's just a choice between personalities rather than a difference of significant party programs. And if I'm not there, so I'm preaching from the outside, if I were in the DA leadership, I would spend a lot more time thinking about the messaging and the program rather than, if we have leader X or leader Y. Because I think our own history in South Africa has proven that it's not just about the person at the top, although that is important. It's also about the program underneath that person that will determine the success or the failure of the party or indeed the country.
I wanted to ask you about the constituency of the DA and in this pursuit of the black vote, or increasing the black vote within the DA, things like land issues and these things have come up. Do you think there's a chance that we'll see an alienation factor by the DA's constituency, the more conservative people within the party, when we get to the polls next week?
Well, I think there's a misapprehension that somehow if you're white, coloured or Indian, a minority, you're conservative, and if you're black, you're very progressive, because that's inherent in not just your question, but that general assumption. Of course, complete nonsense, actually. You've got social liberals who are white, gay people, activists, for example. You've got very, very conservative people who happen to be black, and then you've got a mixture of those in all groups. So I don't think that race determines your ideology in this or any other country. But I think there are certain interests which attach to communities, which, of course, do come up from time to time. And because of South Africa's extraordinary racial history that obviously has an ethnic fault line. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that there are tensions that do reveal themselves. We had that, what Helen Zille herself described as a plane crash, when the DA flip-flopped on employment equity last year, whether they were in favour of it, then they were against it. And I think that there is some tension between, if you like, the traditional group of DA supporters and the new group, and the group that the party wants to reach in order to expand its electoral tension. And I think the same, strangely enough, is true of the African National Congress, though it's much bigger in the sense that it consists of different factions, wings, and ideologies. And that is true of any political party that reaches a certain critical mass. So in other words, if you're pretty small, you can be, and I know because I started off leading the party, it was a 7 MP party, and then I left, it was 57 MPs, and now it's about 80, so it's much bigger.
The progression.
But I do know that actually, when you're small, you can be pretty cohesive. When you get bigger, you do have all these tensions now and differences, and that's inevitable with growth. How you manage them and mediate them, of course, is the essential question.
Finally, Mr. Leon, on a personal level, I know you feel like you're probably a little bit on the outside looking in, but who are you voting for next week?
Well, it would be rather self-defeating if I didn't vote for the party that I committed most of my life to building up, the DA. But I do think the most important thing about this election is that people exercise not just their democratic choice, but do so free of any other considerations. Who's going to do the best for you? So I'm a bit, someone said the difference between bacon and egg is that the chicken is involved, but the pig is committed. So I'm pretty much a pig in that sense, forgive my rather elegant, because I was so much part of the opposition movement in this country. But I hope people will go to the polls, first of all, and secondly, I really hope that they will think about the issues before they vote, think about the country they want, and then vote accordingly. Because, everyone's vote back in 1994 actually built South Africa to where it is today. And the critical thing is that we must keep building.
Mr. Leon, thank you very much for joining us, giving us unique insights into what will be an exciting week in South Africa the next week to come. Thank you very much.